out for us.
Okay. So what I want to do is share with you the background that I've begun to understand dealing with diverse, inclusive, and inequitable department. I'm going to go into who we are today in terms of IDARE, and then end with the set of questions of who do we want to become. I'm sure you all recognize this from the Biden inauguration. Amanda Gorman, the poet, she said, "For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." And I think you have to hold on and remember that this is where we're going. We're going to move forward in this direction. So here I am, approximately a year after Marcia asked me to take this on. It's actually about 14 months. And I can say that I went from being non-racist to anti-racist. I really did not understand that before. What I knew was a little. What I did not know is a lot. And I can tell you I've learned a lot. There's no question. I've listened carefully. I have a long way to go. And I think this is a message to each of us, because although we think we know what we're doing, I think there's a lot more that we can each do. Bias and microaggression training. I've taken many of these courses. I suspect many of you have as well. They're important, but I think they have very limited impact. This is what I keep on hearing from company and person after person. They learn something, but it doesn't impact and get into the system. And the other thing is there's a wealth of books, videos, news articles, magazines that deal with the issues of IDARE. And if one wants to, they can get an incredible amount of knowledge. And the issues dealing with white privilege, white supremacy and nationalism, and Black Lives Matter are clearly important, and Black Lives Matter do really, really important. So one of the books that I'll refer to many times is a book, Begin Again. The reading group is actually reading this book at the present time. And it involves the telling of ourselves. This is Eddie Glaude. And the book itself, I'll share with you in a moment, really deals with the writings of James Baldwin in the 60s. This involves telling ourselves the truth about what we have done, entails implementing policies that remedy generations of inequities. The lies that the concepts all men are created equal and humans are generally good are not practiced. Justice requires a set of values that holds every, and I repeat, human being is sacred. And I think Eddie Glaude has captured all that James Baldwin wrote. And I don't know how many people have read Baldwin. I did read him in the 60s. I probably read 4 or 5 of his books. I thought I understood them. Now that I'm rereading some of them, it's a whole new level of knowledge and understanding. What he said in the 50s and the 60s is remarkably useful today. So I want to deal with what I call statements of facts or realities. These are not personal statements. I think these are generalizable statements. And I ask you to give me leeway because I'm saying things that are sort of absolute, but nothing is absolute. So there are Black communities, there are white communities, and there are other segregated communities. And one thing that categorizes these is there's a high degree of socialization. If you're living in an enclave, those people get together and socialize. They share meals, they do mutual services for each other. There are mixed communities. And there is rare socialization. It happens, but it's not frequent. And I look at Hopkins. We are Black, we are white, we are people of color, we're minorities of all times. We work together. we actually work together pretty well most of the time. But as an institution of people, we rarely socialize. There are events like in our department that the department puts on where people come. But I don't know how, because I've never done the analysis, how mixed are those parties and do we capture everyone? The second set of, there are 3 slides in this category. So white supremacy, actually the core principle is anti-Semitism. I keep on reading about this and I keep on being shocked that that is the case. But as you will remember in the Charlottesville Trump event, as the people walked by with their tiki torches, what they said was, Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. There is an awful lot of hate and animosity toward people of color and other minorities, but the basis seems to be anti-Semitism. And then the amount of writing on this shocks me when I did a literature search. There is structural racism in every aspect of American life. And one example, one of the former advisors to the department is an attorney who took care and did sports law, labor sports law. And I'm still in touch with him. His name is George Cohn, and George is in his late 80s. And he shared with me that at March Madness, college sports, that 2-week period of basketball, brought into the association that oversees college sports an amount of money. And I ask you to think for yourself for 1-2 seconds, how much money that actually brought in. And those 2 weeks brought in 1.1 billion, that's a B, dollars, 2 weeks. Now, it's basketball. Most of the players in that college basketball are Black. So they were the ones that brought in this huge amount of money. Where does that money get spent? Well, it gets spent on almost all sports. Baseball gets some, basketball gets some, football gets some, badminton, skating, tennis, mainly white sports. So again, the way this program is set up, the white sports get the greater benefit of what has been brought in by the Black population. And there's example after example, but I think it's one that just shows you how structural racism impacts us in every which way. The white educational system that I grew up in, and everyone I've spoken to, has not taught Black history. We just have never heard of it. And the reading group did a play called The Niceties, which is available on YouTube. And it shares the story of a white history professor and a Black student who see American history through 2 different eyes. And it's an incredibly important play to show you what it is that one side sees and what the other one sees. And I don't think the Black community has shared or determined how to share their joys with anyone else. Juneteenth, I think something that's been celebrated for almost 200 years, 150 years, is something celebrated by the entire Black community. I can tell you that I don't know, or I have not found a white person that knows anything about June 13th except for the last 3 years. Because when I asked that, when did you learn about it? Oh, last year, maybe 2 years ago, is the answer. And I think this is something, my wife always shares a story about her mother who said, sorrow shared is sorrow divided. Happiness shared or joy shared is joy multiplied. So I think there's there's a really message. And I do have a quote at the end by the artist self. And we'll share that, and it goes right into that. And then my last statement of facts. Every time a Black community does something well or is provided the same as the white community, it is very quickly destroyed or taken away. And that's every time. Land upon emancipation, 40 acres, taken away and became sharecropping. Black Wall Street, this wonderfully successful Oklahoma community, was up and functioning and independent and was burnt down. And then when Black soldiers came out of World War II, they were not offered the GI Bill of Rights, which really put a lot of people into very good jobs. And this taking away or pushing down or eliminating from goes over and over and over again. Voting rights. And now we see it at the present time with the Republican governors in the Republican states passing laws to actually stop or hinder people from voting. Not stop them, but it really puts barriers up. So it's just a continuation. And you have to be mad at it if you have any empathy. And then there's a book, buried book, it's in the law literature, called From Slavery to Hate Crime. And it details how the slavery issues and the laws that got passed were completely neutered right after they were first written to get them passed through our Congress. And you have all of these hate crimes. The author is a young Israeli, actually, by the name of Eli Aronson. His father was a postdoc and spent a sabbatical at Hopkins on 2 different occasions, working at the Bloomberg, but it wasn't Bloomberg then. So things come around. We live 3 lies. So we live a lie and another lie and yet another lie. And I'm going to share those in a moment. But part of the background reading to get to understand this, I think I have tried to make it as concise as possible, is the book, The Causes of Freedom, which the reading group did read. Begin Again, which we're finishing up this in 2 weeks. And the play, The Niceties, which I've already mentioned. It's available on YouTube and you can watch it. It's free and it's really, really powerful. And I think there's a 4th one that I would now add, is a new column in the New York Times on a regular basis by a linguist whose name is McWhorter. And I believe he is Black. And his writings about words are just fantastic and what they mean. And he deals with issues that clearly relate to IDARE issues. So Begin Again. And again, I want to bring this up as hope, because not everything is lost. Responsibility cannot be lost. It can only be abdicated. You can only give it away. You can't lose it. If one refuses to give it away, abdication, one begins again. So I think there's a message here specifically for us that fit what we're trying to do, to identify who we are, what can we do, what should we be doing in the future to deal with the issues of equity and justice. So the book summarizes all of Baldwin.
Hi, honey.
It summarizes all of Baldwin. It's an easy read. It's not very long. And James Baldwin clearly understood the power of the American lie, the first lie, and I'll share that in a moment, and wrote about it. one thing that happens is he dealing with the lie by traveling and writing, and he escapes into societies or areas like Turkey, where he doesn't know the language and doesn't know the people, but is able to write and relate to people as he goes shopping or to a restaurant. And personally, I think that impacted me because I was looking and asking the question like everybody else, since there's so much that bothers me, where should I be living? And there's no place because they all have the same issues. But going to a place that Baldwin calls everywhere, where you create that environment for yourself, where you lose yourself but focus on what you have to do, really spoke to me personally. So the first lie, and this is interpreted by Kenneth Mack, who's a scholar at Harvard. The lie is the national myth of America as, quote, fundamentally good and innocent, which allows the nation, quote, to avoid facing the truth about its unjust treatment of Black people and how it deforms the soul of the country. Baldwin's response to the lie was to bear witness, and Glaude terms it to tell the story. I think I have a broader generalization of that lie, in that it really is not following the Declaration of Independence. Because it states, and this is a quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And we say this in our Declaration of Independence, but we don't live by it with the Black and white and other minority populations of any time. So it's a lie that we live with. Another lie, and you don't have to be religious for this, we are created in God's image as a common statement. That means all of us, Black, white, Asian, man, woman, LGBTQ person, underrepresented minorities, indigenous people, all of us, all humans are included. And clearly we do not treat each and every human as if they represented God or somebody we revered. And the third lie is that the US is number one. And I took most of this from a recent editorial of Nicholas Kristof, but there are many other sources. On the scale of social index progress, which rates health, safety, and well-being, we are country number 28. World competitive ranking economically, we're number 10 out of 64 economies. And the World Bank ranks us as number 35 out of 174 countries. That doesn't look like number one. But continuing the lifespan, US is 46 out of 193 countries. Our lifespan. That's an average male and females, and it's pre-COVID. Hong Kong is the longest of 85 years. Italy and Netherlands, two of my favorite places, are 84 and 82. And there's the US, below 80, 79. So, we're not number one. And I started to put a list together of what we are number one, and I refused to put it on the slide because we have the most people incarcerated. We make the most guns that people use. It's all terrible stuff. So I'm not trying to depress you. I've depressed myself enough, but I think there is hope. So, excuse me. So EHE, who are we today? What are we doing? Well, we're actually teaching diversity, inclusion, equity. We have an ongoing development of an IDARE website that is truly resource dense. And we are getting requests for people to copy part of our website on a regular basis. It's not weekly, but it's close to that. Because we have material up there that people want to use. And then we are currently reviewing our courses to make sure we are anti-racist, that we're eliminating structural racism, and that we're including environmental justice. And this is a huge undertaking. I mean, if you do it for the Berman Institute, they have 8 courses, easy to do. We have a huge number of courses. And Megan Davis and Ramachandran are both taking care of this and beginning that process. Really critical. Who are we today? We're beginning to collect the numbers, the data of who we are today. I mean, there are things that we know, but we don't have the facts completed today. But I can easily point out that one of the things that we have is, if you look at staff, our Black population is very close in staff to Baltimore City. So in that respect, it's okay. But if you look at where Black people are as related to white people, unfortunately, there are almost very few Black people in the higher levels of our administration. So it's something that we have to work on and correct. And the other thing that we've begun to do is develop access to the BIPOC and underrepresented minority students so that they'll be encouraged to join us. And I think we actually have a fairly good record at this point in time on the students that we're bringing in, who they are and what the diversity is. What are we doing at IDARE? Well, we have essentially a weekly meeting. This meeting is one of 2 that we hold a month on the 2nd and 4th week of the month. And we have a reading group that meets on the 1st and the 3rd weeks of the month. And all of these where we are sharing and listening. And I think we've really gotten pretty good at doing that well. We've had some, like one would expect, some rough starts, but overall, I think we're doing phenomenally well. We get school and university updates, and we discuss current events, current things that are happening and how they're impacting on us. I think that's been really good. The reading group, we've made this as easy as possible. We actually attempt and succeed at this point in limiting the reading to less than an hour per week, so that we do a book slowly. What we do, like the play was an hour and 50 minutes, we were able to do that by watching it over 2 weeks. You did it at one time, but it took 2 hours for the preparation of it. And then there was the discussion. So that's that. I think one of the issues that we have to look at, and I don't think we yet have a plan, but I could be wrong, on equity in the department for positions and salary. And I think that the whole school has to really work on to get this all together. So as a department and as individuals, the question I want to discuss, because I don't have the answers, is what are we going to achieve? What do we want to do? What do we want to participate in? And what do we want to share? I think there are opportunities here for us to define what it is and how we want to become anti-racist and inclusive. I think the word inclusion, though, is one that requires a separate discussion. If you're invited to the party, you're included. If you sit in the corner and don't say anything to anybody, you forgot the first part of the word inclusion because it starts with letter I. So it's a two-way street for inclusion that I think has to be explored in some detail that we haven't done yet. And as a department, as individuals, should we develop materials on environmental justice, other topics? I know there are some that are doing things at this point, and we're going to share those with you in terms of community outreach, for example. And hopefully there'll be other material that will be shared as we go forward that I think the department is really doing quite well at. So there is a current exhibit at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And one of the artists is a Black artist by the name of Chasbalala Self. And one of the things that she has in her write-up, and I took a photograph of it, so I got it correct at the exhibit. She's an incredibly interesting artist. I think that this is a time for Black people and people of color to reclaim our power. For us to truly inhabit our power, we would really have to be introspective to define ourselves. We have to recreate a whole new rhetoric around our identities. And she's not talking about power in the sense of violence, or power in the sense of taking things over, but her artwork and her statements all relate to the power to identify oneself and to become part of the collective. And I go back to my next to last slide, which was the second slide, where there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're, excuse me, brave enough to be it. So how do we participate as an individual? I think we're going to have lots of open discussions. Each of them will be focused. But I want to keep in mind some of the points that I tried to make as I went through this presentations. White people have not been taught Black history. And I was speaking to a good white friend, a good Black friend of mine we've been working together for more than 40 years. He said, you know, when he heard that statement, he had to think about it. And he went to a public school in a white neighborhood, had a lot of Black students in his class, but he was never taught Black history. The US lives on several lies, and I think they're really destructive, and I think they have to be called out. I mean, I know that when I've been to Europe a lot. We've lived there several times. So the medical care we get there is really good. And it's always a little bit better than we tend to get here in terms of accessibility and things. Although I can't complain, we get incredible medical care of who we are, and we're part of Hopkins. But one story, I was living in Paris at the time, and I had a very set of clogged sinuses. So I ended up going to a local physician, and he looks and he says, I really got to get x-rays to see how bad you are, so how we're going to treat you. He says, all you have to do is walk, and it was a 2-block walk, one way and a block walk the other way to the radiologist. And he says, he'll give you the results and come back here and we'll get you a prescription. So I went and I got the pictures taken, and as I went to pay that bill, the receptionist said to me, could you wait a minute? The physician would like to see you. I said, sure. So I sat down, and a minute or two later, the radiologist comes out, sits down with a slightly French accent, but perfect English, says, you know, I see you're from Baltimore and Johns Hopkins. Do you get this kind of service at Hopkins where you can walk and get your x-rays and the radiologist will come out and tell you what it means? And I says, no, I don't even get that at Hopkins. And he said, yeah, when I was at Hopkins, I didn't give that kind of service either. It was amazing to me. He was a Hopkins trained radiologist, but it's different. The BIPOC communities have not shared their joys. I mentioned that earlier, and I think it's really important. Whites fear the loss of privilege. And I can tell you with certainty how true that is, because every white person I've spoken to and said that will argue with me endlessly that they don't fear that. White nationalism and privileges are not the same. And the department, having talked a lot with Marsha, seeks equity and justice. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm very hopeful that we will be able to do it.